I had been standing in the same spot for 4 hours, and nobody had looked at me twice. That was fine. That was exactly how I liked it. My name is Marcus Vale, and I was the personal bodyguard of Ambassador Sarath Vale of the Velhari people. I had been assigned to her 6 months ago through the Terran Liaison Security Corps, which was a fancy name for a program that placed human security contractors with alien diplomatic officials. Most of the aliens who hired through the program did it because human bodyguards were cheap compared to the alternatives. A few did it out of curiosity. Sarath Vale had done it, as far as I could tell, because she had read my file and found something in it that she respected. I still was not entirely sure what that something was. The Conclave of Worlds was the largest diplomatic station I had ever set foot in, and I had been in some impressive buildings in my time. It orbited a massive purple gas giant in neutral space, far enough from any single government that everyone could pretend they were on equal footing. The main chamber alone could have swallowed 3 football stadiums. The ceiling was made of some kind of transparent material that showed the gas giant hanging above us like a bruised moon, and the light it threw across the room was always shifting between violet and deep amber. There were 240 delegates in the room that morning, representatives of 41 species, some of them so old that humans had still been drawing animals on cave walls when their civilizations launched their first starships. The air smelled like a combination of things I could not fully name, because every species had its own atmospheric preferences, and the station did its best to find a middle ground that nobody was fully comfortable with. I was standing 3 steps behind Ambassador Sarath Vale, slightly to her left, which is where I always stood. She was tall, even by Velhari standards, with 6 limbs, 4 of which she used for walking, and 2 of which she used for gesturing, holding things, and expressing emotions that her face was not built to show. Her skin was a pale silver gray that shifted color depending on her mood, the way some deep ocean fish shift color in the dark. When she was calm, she was silver. When she was focused, she went a cool blue. When she was privately amused by something, which happened more often than people expected, she went a very faint gold at the edges. She was silver right now, which meant she was calm and in control, which was what I needed her to be. The other bodyguards in the room were, almost without exception, either Kreth mercenaries or Dorvani sentinels. The Kreth were enormous, somewhere between 2.5 and 3 meters tall, covered in natural body armor that looked like overlapping plates of dark stone, and they carried weapons openly because their contracts allowed it, and because nobody in their right mind told a Kreth to put something down. The Dorvani were older, quieter, and significantly more frightening in my personal opinion. They were slender beings, almost fragile-looking, with long crested heads and enormous black eyes that missed nothing. They had been the premier warrior diplomat order in known space for longer than my species had existed, and they moved through rooms the way water moves through sand, silently and completely. Then there was me. Average height, plain dark suit, earpiece. No visible weapon, though I had one, because my contract allowed a single concealed sidearm, and I intended to use that allowance until someone physically took the right away from me. More than one delegate had glanced at Sarath Vale, and then at me, with the very clear expression of someone thinking that the ambassador had made a questionable decision. I had learned to be unbothered by that look. Being unbothered by things was, in fact, one of my primary professional skills. The opening ceremony had finished an hour ago. Now we were in the first formal session, which meant speeches. A lot of speeches. The kind of speeches that sounded important and said very little, delivered by beings who had been trained since youth to say very little in the most impressive way possible. I had stopped listening to the content within the first 20 minutes and focused instead on what I was actually being paid to focus on, which was everything else. The delegate from the Murath Collective was seated directly across the chamber from Sarath Vale's position. The Murath were a broad-chested species, gray-skinned, with flat, wide faces and small, dark eyes that always looked slightly bored. They were not bored. The Murath were one of the 3 or 4 most powerful factions in the Conclave, and they had not gotten that way by being bored. They had gotten that way by being patient and precise, and very good at doing things that could not be easily proven. The delegate's name was Counselor Drev. I had read his file the same way I read every file connected to this assignment, thoroughly and more than once. He was old by Murath standards, highly decorated, and had been involved in 4 separate diplomatic incidents over the past 20 years that had ended badly for the species opposing him. In each case, the exact mechanism of what happened had never been fully established. Things had simply gone wrong for his opponents, in ways that were difficult to explain and impossible to attribute. During the opening ceremony, Councillor Drev had looked at Sareth Vale and made a gesture with his right hand. It was small, brief, the kind of thing that looked like nothing, like a man adjusting his sleeve or brushing something from his palm. My translator did not flag it. The Dorvani sentinel nearest to me did not react. The Kreth guards did not move. Something in my stomach tightened like a fist. I did not know what the gesture meant. I filed it away and kept watching. By the second hour of the session, I had noticed 3 things that individually meant nothing, and together made the back of my neck feel like someone was holding a lit match to it. The first was that one of the Kreth guards had shifted his weight twice in the same direction, which was not random. Trained guards do not shift their weight randomly. They shift it in response to something, usually something they are too disciplined to openly acknowledge. The second was that one of the Dorvani sentinels, seated near the back wall, had let her head crest rise slightly and then deliberately lowered it again. That was the Dorvani equivalent of flinching and then catching yourself. Something had startled her, something she had sensed rather than seen. The third was 2 of Councillor Drev's aides, seated behind him, who kept glancing toward the eastern wall of the chamber. Not at anything specific on the wall, just in that direction, the way people glance toward a door when they are expecting someone to walk through it. There was no door on the eastern wall. There was a ventilation corridor access point, barely visible behind a decorative panel. I had been in enough rooms where something bad was about to happen that I had stopped needing proof before I acted. Proof was what you gathered afterward. What you gathered before was instinct, and instinct was the thing that had kept me alive through 11 years of work, in environments where being wrong meant being dead. I leaned slightly toward Sareth Vale. She was in the middle of a sentence, addressing the chamber with the fluid, unhurried elegance that was one of the things that made her genuinely good at this work. I kept my voice at the lowest level my earpiece could transmit. 3 minutes, I said. Trust me. She did not pause. She did not look at me. Beneath the podium, hidden by its wide base, one of her secondary hands moved in a small, clear gesture that I had learned to read over 6 months of close proximity. It meant, I hear you. Go. She finished her sentence, and then she tilted her head in that particular way she had, and said that she would like to call a brief procedural recess for translation calibration, citing a minor discrepancy in the frequency band of the 3rd quadrant's receiver array. It was the most believable technical excuse I had ever heard, delivered by someone who had invented it entirely on the spot in under 4 seconds. I was already moving. I did not hurry. Hurrying attracts attention, and attention was the last thing I needed. I walked the way I always tried to walk in sensitive environments, like a person with a specific, dull purpose, a technician going somewhere routine, a staff member following up on a minor task. I passed 3 Kreth guards, and not one of them tracked me with their eyes. The access panel for the ventilation corridor was held in place by 4 fasteners that required a specific tool to open. I did not have that tool. I had a folded piece of hardened metal that I had been carrying in my left jacket pocket for 6 months, purely because experience had taught me that ventilation panels were the kind of thing that eventually became relevant. It took me 40 seconds to get the panel open. The device was there. It was small, not much larger than my closed fist, attached to the interior of the corridor wall just inside the opening. I recognized the casing. I had seen Murath signal disruption hardware before, in a briefing document 2 years ago that had been flagged for security contractors working in conclave-adjacent environments. What I did not recognize immediately was the secondary component attached to its underside, a small pressurized container connected to the device's output mechanism. I took approximately 4 seconds to understand what I was looking at. The signal disruptor would have fired on a timer or a remote trigger, blanketing the chamber in a frequency that disrupted the velhari nervous system's bioluminescent control. It would not have hurt Sareth Vale physically. It would have done something in some ways much worse. It would have caused her skin to flicker and go dark, her speech to slow and slur, her secondary limbs to tremble, all of it in front of 240 delegates representing 41 species, at the exact moment she was making the most important argument of this session. She would not have been harmed. She would have been finished. The secondary canister contained the delivery mechanism for a pathogen agent, almost certainly a variant specifically cultured for velhari biology, designed to accelerate the disruption and make it look like illness rather than sabotage. My hands were steady when I reached in and began working. I had learned to disassemble things under pressure from a man named Sergeant Okafor in a training environment that I would not describe at a dinner party. The principle he taught me was simple. When you need to disable something, and you do not have the right tools, and you do not have enough time, you do not try to be clever. You find the single connection without which nothing else functions, and you remove it. Everything else is extra. It took me 2 minutes and 11 seconds. I put the panel back. I walked back into the chamber. The recess was still ongoing, delegates standing in small clusters, aides murmuring, the ambient sounds of 40 species making conversation filling the air like a complicated piece of music. Nobody looked at me. I returned to my position behind Sarath Vale's podium and gave her a single small nod. Her skin went faint gold at the edges. She stepped back to the podium and called the session back to order. Then I stepped forward. One step. Just one. But in a room governed by protocols that had been established before my planet had a written language, one step by a bodyguard during an active session was enough. Every head in the room turned. I reached into my jacket and took out the device. I set it on the surface of the moderator's table at the front of the chamber, with the careful, deliberate movement of someone placing something very important in a very visible location. The sound it made when it touched the table was small. The silence that followed it was enormous. I spoke quietly. My earpiece transmitted evenly to every translator node in the room. I found this in the eastern ventilation corridor approximately 8 minutes ago, I said. It is a signal disruption unit with a secondary biological dispersal component, both carrying manufacturing signatures consistent with Marath collective technical production from the last decade. I have disabled it. I would welcome formal verification of my analysis, since I am aware that my technical expertise in Marath hardware is limited, and I want to be sure I have not made an error. I was not concerned about errors. I had not made one. Counselor Drev rose from his seat. He was very good, I will give him that. His voice was controlled, his posture was composed, and his objection was framed in precisely the kind of language that was designed to make the person he was objecting to feel as though they had done something inappropriate. He used words like jurisdiction and protocol and unverified assertion, and he arranged them in an order that was genuinely impressive. It did not matter. Because while he was speaking, the eldest delegate of the Dorvani order rose from her seat at the far end of the chamber. She was so old that her crest had gone almost white, and she had not, according to the session records that I had read during my preparation, spoken out of turn in 41 years of conclave attendance. She looked at me across the full width of that enormous room. Then she raised one long hand and performed a gesture that I recognized because I had seen it in a cultural briefing document marked as rarely observed in modern settings. It was the Dorvani salute, given only to those who have demonstrated genuine courage in the protection of someone who could not protect themselves. She held it for 3 full seconds. The silence in that chamber was unlike anything I had ever heard. It was not the silence of shock, though that was part of it. It was the silence of a very large number of very old and very powerful minds simultaneously reconsidering something they had believed without question. They had looked at me all morning and seen a human. Young species. Unproven. An odd choice for a diplomat of Sarath Vale's standing. They were looking at me differently now. Later, when the session had ended, and the treaty had passed, and the Murath faction had been formally censured, and the corridor outside the chamber was finally quiet, Sarath Vale stood beside me and studied me with those large, luminous eyes. "How did you know?" she asked. I thought about it honestly, the way she deserved. "I have been in a lot of rooms where something bad was about to happen," I said. "You learn what it feels like. My species had a lot of practice." She was quiet for a moment. Her skin moved slowly through that deep, warm gold. "The conclave thinks of humans as new," she said. "Young, still learning." "I know," I said. "They are wrong," she said simply. "You are not new. You have simply been somewhere else, learning different things, harder things. I did not answer that. There was nothing to add that would have improved it. I just went back to watching the corridor. That was my job, and I was very good at it.